Hey Gina, on this week's podcast, I'd like to talk about something I've been struggling with keeping my mouth shut because I've discussed it a long time ago and trying to express our opinions in the most neutral way possible. I hope that I can continue to do that again this week as we explore Do Words Matter? As I started looking up Do Words Matter, I found a multitude of essays and articles from different sources that answered my questions with why words matter. Looking at this from the perspective of why words matter is important because words, phrases, language, in general, it kind of just means everything to the world, right? This is how we communicate with another. The interesting part to me is what society decides that words has certain strengths and certain weaknesses and what they mean. I wanted to get your thoughts on what you think about words and why do they matter.
Wow. You're making me think about that moment where my mom, I was growing up and she said, en boca cerrada no entran moscas. And for those who don't speak Spanish, is if your mouth is closed, you don't get any flies in it. But it makes a lot more sense in Spanish and more in context with my mom always was very careful about her word of choice and at home and with other people. And she was very, very thoughtful about the words she used because, and early on we learned that they can get you in trouble. I mean, they can get you a job, or they can get you a date, or they can get you fired, or they can get you in a really big trouble. So using and understanding how much power the words carry is kind of like what I really, really feel that this topic could make us think about what is it that we're putting out in the world every single day when we talk to each other.
It's very important because the ability to communicate through words is what makes us human, right? Animals don't necessarily talk through words that at least we can understand. They have their own kind of language, but in how we communicate to one another, we can make someone feel happy, we can make someone feel sad, we can make someone feel angry, we can make someone feel scared. So there's a litany of ways that we use words to be able to interact with others.
You can see that there in history, there's so many installments of moments where you can really drive an entire revolution based on the words you used. And sometimes those words could be used for good or could be used for bad. And we don't know it until sometimes after time goes by. There are moments where maybe you're growing up, you heard a word over and over again, that when you grow up, you're like, I don't ever want to use that word because it just created an emotional scar for me. I remember having a conversation with someone and I used a word that I thought it was, growing up in my household, using, for example, estúpida was not a word that we used to each other. It felt mean to each other. Though a friend of mine, we used to call me estúpida. And I said, why are you calling me estúpida? I don't like it. And she says, oh, why are you putting so much power in the word? I said, well, because it's a derogatory word. She says, no, it's a loving word. And I thought it's interesting, our perspectives, because my growing up told me that's not a good word to use. And her was like, yeah, I love you. I can call you something like that because it shows how much I love you, actually. But, when you see now, for example, that's when we were growing up, and now you start seeing some of these exposure that we have, and we even have to be more careful about the words we use.
That's interesting that you gave me that example because I was just thinking about how words give expression to an abstract way of thinking or an abstract way of feeling, right? So someone can be feeling something for you, and in certain cultures we'll use, how can I put this? We'll put someone down or we'll joke with someone. I guess I've always been that playful person that says, if I can joke with you and I can rib you and I can mess with you, that means that I like you. If I'm not saying anything to you, that means I don't like you and I don't want to interact with you. But people can take words the wrong way, and part of it starts with a conversation when a party may feel that they've been injured or they've been bothered. So I think communication is key. But one thing I do want to mention is sometimes words give us a full picture, right? Or they give us that full story. They'll provide a context. They'll provide background, a beginning and an end. Sometimes we don't see how to structure a story, or we don't see how to put something together without using these words and understanding why these words matter. I think it's very important.
Absolutely, because first of all, we come from the Spanish language as our hard language, Romance language. So for us, even words take even more of a detour of making sure that you're being emotional through it, and you're projecting these so stereotypical passion of Latinos. But there is more than that. The words is a two-way street. You have a word that means something to you, and in a word that means something else to me. Though we're looking at the same word, but it all comes down to how we interpret it and how we clarify, create a context, like you just said. How do we create context to the things that we say to each other? Because depending on the context, you just I don't know if you ever heard about the greeting in the morning that you give to Latinos, and you say, "Amaneciste." ¿Amaneciste? You can have 5 different connotations. ¿Cómo amaneció? Because depending how you say it, it may take a surprise, or it just have a different connotation. But words, to me, is something that we cannot take lightly. They're weapons. They're weapons that we could use to hurt or to build.
It's funny the way that you said one of the amanecistes was like if they were surprised that they woke up in the morning, like they were expecting them to be dead.
That's the irony.
Yeah. So words connect us to one another, right? And I think that's where we lose ourselves sometimes in the beauty of another one's story. I love reading a book and being able to fall into that book and just get drowned in it, right? And I think many of us feel passionately that way. Or a movie. I love watching a movie. And I'm not necessarily always watching the movie for the visual effects. I'm watching the movie for the words. I'm watching to see how I can connect with what's being portrayed on that screen and how it intersects with my life. One last thing that I do want to mention on why words matter is that it sparks sometimes our imagination, right? So having a conversation between 2 friends says, hey, let's start a podcast. And then we get the LatinX Point of View podcast, right? So words are very powerful in how we use them. It's just how we choose to use them. And we need to be very careful about using words or how we use those words. Now, I do want to take a quick break and continue our conversation.
LatinX Point of View is brought to you by Civic Canvas, a bilingual boutique firm designing strategies for social change. To learn more at civiccanvas.com.
If you like the LatinX Point of View podcast, please subscribe to receive the latest updates and alerts about new episodes. We are available on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and Castbox. If you have any show topics or ideas, follow us on Twitter at LatinXPOV or email us at latinxpov@gmail.com.
I can remember there's some songs when I was growing up that just carried this title. There was one by Rudy La Scala that was ¿Por qué será? And it just meant so much. I thought that songwriters have such a powerful way to relinquish, to express themselves. And that's, I think, the first times that I discovered the power of words. Even now, for example, some of the search for the right words in branding, you can recall saying, for example, you see Nike, and as soon as you see something that says just do it, the Nike is telling you just do it. And it carries on to create a culture of achievement, of endurance, of resistance. And I thought that, even when Nike created, I don't think they knew what was that one just tagline was going to do to a culture like ours, because it was in the beginning of the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. But it just propelled a whole generation to see footwear in a completely different fashion than we used to. And to me, that's the kind of, when you start shifting and thinking differently about the word because someone gave you new words.
Branding is so critical. I was in a session a few weeks ago where they talked about marketing and how marketing your business, how branding your business is key, because you don't necessarily have to put your product out there for someone to want to be your customer. So one of the examples that they showed was It was a video of this lady, and she was trying to find someone, and she kept getting turned down, and she finally got to this location, and she didn't find the person that she was looking for, and she's all sad. And then the video goes, let's see what really happened. And it showed all the people that helped this woman through her struggle. And then at the end, it said, bank with us. And it was about a bank. And I had no idea it was about a bank. It showed a human interest story. And it captivated me to say, man, I want to bank at that institution.
There you go.
So I think you're absolutely right. When you talk about branding and the power of branding and the words, because using words and as I mentioned before, using words to tell a story, right?
Yeah.
Using words to tell a story can be very, very captivating.
Hey, imagine, well, in this case, just do it. It shaped the whole generation. But what happens when you use a tagline or a word or a statement that creates the opposite, not positive?
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of such a tagline or such an issue, and nothing's jumping out to me, because that means that it wasn't a successful campaign, right? That means that if you really bothered someone with the choice of words that you use to try to sell your product or to put your product out there in the market, then your product was most likely a failure, or you had to go and rebrand it. Mm-hmm. Think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, and now what we're getting to is that we all have access, right? Before, we had to wait for television or print to be able to do these for us, and they were very good at choosing the words. I mean, sometimes too much, to the point that they molded the way we think. But now everybody pretty much has a platform because of social media.
It's true. And social media, when I think back on it, let's think about the evolution of the message, right? Uh-huh. So the message keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter. It started with books. You can make books as long as you want, right? As many pages as you want to tell a story. Then it became magazines. So you started telling people stories in a much smaller platform, or a much smaller, more digestible kind of medium, right? You had articles, and then articles turned to essays. So when we start looking at this, then we talk about print media turning to social media that limits us on certain platforms to 144 characters. So what's the message that you can actually get across in those 144 characters when you're using it? I think when you talk about us having control of our platforms too, it's really interesting when you talk about YouTube. I think YouTube revolutionized the generation to say, you know what, you want to put out content, you don't have to go out and wait for someone to give you a deal in order to put out content. We have platforms like SoundCloud who have been really instrumental in helping people develop how they express their words through music, So yeah, words do matter. To me, how you use those words, I think, is also a matter of fact and something that we should be looking into.
Absolutely. I love the fact that, I don't know if our listeners, they feel challenged to be able to resume or summarize their thoughts in so many characters, because it's very challenging. It does give you discipline about kind of creating a summarized thought about something you're trying to say, but also because you're using so few words that those words carry even more weight, because there is more room for interpretation. So you have to be very intentional about what the words that you're going to use, because that will forever live on the internet. And as we know, that could come back to you if you ever wanted to do anything else, anything, get a job in these cases, could get you in trouble. I think that's the power of words. It's something, we can see it at a general point of view. We can see something that's very individual. Is that, how do we treat the person I love? Or how do I treat my children? In treating something, a while back when I was doing a lot of work with men who batter women, some of the aha moments that we